Hello and welcome to the How to Carnivore podcast. I'm your host, Simon Lewis, and you're tuning into the Plant-Free MD series with Dr. Anthony Chaffee. Dr. Chaffee is a surgeon, nutritional researcher, and former pro rugby player. He's been strict carnivore for 3 years and an on and off carnivore for more than 20. Dr. Chaffee looks and feels like a real-life superhero. If losing fat, building muscle, finding focus, and getting the most out of life is important to you, you're going to love the Plant-Free MD series. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode with the Plant-Free MD, Dr. Anthony Chaffee. Today, the topic is diabetes. This is an extremely important one because I've just done a little bit of Googling, and 1 in 20 Australians suffer from diabetes and 1 in 10 Americans suffer from diabetes. So that's 10% of the population. And a little bit more Googling, some of the common symptoms of early stage type 2 diabetes, blurred vision, poor wound healing, yeast infections, a lot of hunger, a lot of thirst, a lot of really unpleasant side effects and symptoms. So Dr. Chaffee, welcome. I'm looking forward to diving into diabetes with you.
Yeah, thanks, man. Me too.
Cool. So just to set the scene for the slow ones like myself, what is diabetes?
So there's a few different kinds of diabetes, but traditionally they're referred to as type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, so type 1 diabetes used to be called juvenile diabetes because we generally saw this in the young, and this is when your body stops producing insulin for some reason. It's thought to be possibly autoimmune, possibly your body after a viral infection has it's called molecular mimicry, where your body has antibodies towards something like a virus or some other sort of pathogen, and then that's close enough to these beta islet cells in your pancreas that make insulin that it attacks those as well. So that's sort of what we're thinking now, but we're not 100% sure.
So sorry to interrupt, is type 1 diabetes, is that caused by lifestyle, or is that sort of something generally outside of people's control?
It's thought to be outside of people's control. It's thought to be, through molecular mimicry or some sort of autoimmune issue. But obviously, as we've spoken about, and I've spoken about on my autoimmune episode, it's possible that autoimmune issues can be precipitated by environment as well. And so the things that we eat and the things that we do can help stop that. Now, once your body has attacked your beta islet cells for whatever reason, that they're generally thought to be gone. However, there are some studies in animal models showing that might actually be able to be reversed actually through diet as well, and diet and fasting, called the fasting mimicking diet, which we can get to. Just to finish with the definitions, type 2 diabetes was previously called adult onset diabetes. In about the 1990s, you had a bunch of kids getting adult onset diabetes, and so they had to rename it instead of actually thinking for half a second and realizing that something was going on that was causing this. So type 2 diabetes is traditionally thought of as peripheral insulin resistance. So you have years and years and years of eating too many carbohydrates and sugar, drinking alcohol, and this sets in motion. You're having high blood sugar all the time, and your body needs more and more insulin, and you actually get peripheral insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, where the high insulin levels are actually causing harm in your body. High blood sugar is causing harm in your body by direct damage by glycating and glycosylation to various molecules. So over the years, you develop peripheral insulin resistance, and now you need more and more insulin to get the same result, just like any sort of drug tolerance issue. You need more and more and more to get the same sort of result. And so eventually they might need to go on insulin as well. That is more thought to be more lifestyle, and you can manage this with diet and exercise. But it's still thought to be a progressive disease, that this only gets worse. It doesn't get better. But of course, in the carnivore community, we actually see this absolutely reversing, people coming off their oral medications, coming off the massive doses of insulin, and at least coming down to a minimal dose of insulin, which is also what we're seeing the type 1 community as well. Their blood sugars are much easier to control because their body's making the exact amount of blood sugar that they need. They're not having these big swings because of what they're eating and have to take fast acting insulins. They can just take their low dose background level of insulin, and because their body's producing constant levels of blood sugar and glycogen, that's all you need. You don't need these breakthrough medications and these fast acting insulins.
Sure. So carnivore has been shown to help with both type 1 and type 2. Was that kind of what you were alluding to there?
Yeah, well, certainly in symptom management.
Okay.
And certainly in progression and the amount of medications that you need. So for type 1, its major benefit that we're seeing now is that it gets people on a minimal dose of insulin, and they don't need to use all the fast acting insulins. And that, you can get very difficult situations where you get hypoglycemic, and you'll have drops, and these are dangerous. You can die from this. And so when you're toying around with your insulin all day, and people get very good at this and practiced at it, so issues can be kept to a minimum. But you do have to be very careful, and especially like teenagers and kids, they really don't like it. They don't like it that they have to do this, and they sort of rebel against it and say, well, I'm not going to do that, and they end up really hurting themselves. With type 2 diabetes, it is actually reversing the disease process.
Yeah, wow.
And as I talk about in other things, that's because these things aren't really diseases; they're actually toxicities. And so you're getting this toxic byproduct, these toxic sort of results of eating carbohydrates, eating sugar, drinking alcohol, and that toxicity manifests as what we call type 2 diabetes. Okay, so you remove the toxin, the toxicity goes away. And so that's what we see, this sort of reversible situation. Okay, so when you remove all that and you go to a carnivore diet and you remove all, you can even do it with a ketogenic diet, just no carbohydrates or sugar or alcohol. People recover very, very well. Their blood sugars stabilize. Their peripheral insulin resistance can actually start to reverse as well. And they come off their medications. They come down on their insulin if they're insulin dependent as well. My mother is a perfect example of that. She was type 2 diabetic for 25 years, off and on, good or bad control, mostly not the best. And her HbA1c, which is a marker of how well you're doing in controlling your blood sugar over the course of 3 months, was fairly high. And she was on 3 oral medications and on a high dose of her background insulin, because she was now insulin dependent because her pancreas had burnt out at that point. And 2 months on a high-fat carnivore diet, she came off all 3 of her medications and reduced her insulin down to the minimal dose of 14 units for Lantus. And her HbA1c went from 8.9, which is quite high, down to 6.1, which is the upper limit of normal for a non-diabetic. Okay, and her doctor just looked at her and said, "How the hell did you do this? What the hell did you do?"
Did she tell them?
Yeah, she did. Yeah, but her doctor's saying like, "Look, this is a progressive disease. This only gets worse. We can mitigate this and slow it down with diet and lifestyle and medication, but this only gets worse. This doesn't just go away. How the hell did you do this?" And my mom told her, it's like, well, Anthony's been doing a lot of research into this. He thinks that we're actually carnivores and that's the type of animal that we are. And when we eat outside of that, this is what's causing these problems. And just going into the whole bit. And she said, she was interested in that. And so I went in and spoke to her for like an hour and a half. Just sort of took over my mom's.
So you went in and spoke doctor to doctor.
Yeah, exactly. And we just spoke and ended up talking for like an hour and a half. Took up a lot of her time, but her and her PA were very, very interested in talking about all these sorts of things. And she's a very bright lady. She's an MD PhD from Harvard. She has a PhD in biochemistry from Harvard. And I just said, I was like, look, we're looking at biochemistry all wrong. We call this a fed state and this a fasting state. I completely disagree. I think the so-called fasting state is our primary metabolic state. That's where all of our heavy machinery comes to bear. This is the metabolic state of animals in the wild because they're all fat driven. They don't eat carbs. Wolves don't eat carbo load before they chase caribou for 10 hours, and they do great. We have studies going back to 1981 looking at wolves, checking their blood sugar, checking their glycogen, and it's just rock solid. The thought was at the time, you have to eat carbs to burn carbs, and they found out, well, no, actually you don't. And so, the only reason that we call one a fed state and the other a fasting state is because by the time we were able to look at our biochemistry at a molecular level, everyone was eating carbohydrates. So, it was just natural. It said, oh, when you eat, your metabolism looks like this. And when you don't eat, it looks like this. It's like, yeah, but when you eat anything except carbohydrates, it also looks like this. And this is, again, where all of our heavy machinery come to bear. Our body starts making blood sugar, making glycogen, making ketones. And it's very exacting. It's so well controlled, like anything else we see in our body. So it's, it's very natural for me to look at that and be like, okay, that makes sense, that's our natural state, as opposed to an insulin driven state where that's blocking off all the mechanics of your.
Yeah, let's dig into this a little bit more so that your average person can understand. So you're sort of differentiating between a fed state and a fasted state, and what are the kind of indicators that we use for a fed state? And I'm putting this in speech marks because this is kind of a term that seems to have been invented to suit carbohydrate consumption. So what are kind of the markers of that?
Well, so and yeah, you're right. I mean, because that's everyone calls it, oh, this is a fed state, that's fasting. And people that have taken biochemistry, people don't think that, well, that's just what it is. It's in a textbook and a discussion. But of course, that's nonsensical. There's plenty of things that have been in textbooks that came out eventually. So when you're in a so-called fed state, you're in an insulin driven state. So your blood sugar goes up, you eat carbohydrates, your blood sugar goes up. This sparks insulin. And so the thought was like, oh, well, this is a normal process. You put in the blood sugar and then your insulin goes up and this brings it down. And this is a normal thing. You have this up and down.
And that's meant to happen 5 times a day as you eat your 5 meals throughout the day.
Yeah, exactly. And so, because we didn't know, and just everyone who ate food, this is what it looked like. And then after you didn't eat for 24 hours, it switched to this other one. But that's it. It's quite simplistic. So when you put in exogenous carbohydrates, when you eat carbohydrates, your blood sugar goes up. But blood sugar, as I alluded to earlier, causes direct damage to your body. So by a process called glycosylation or glycation, these glucose molecules physically fuse to other molecules. This is part of heart disease, where these things fuse onto like SDLDL, certain types of cholesterol, and they make them defunct, and your liver can't take them up, and only their macrophages can take them up, and they turn into these big foam cells. Then you add that to arterial wall damage, and these things can actually get in there through the cracks of these damage, because they're designed to do. They're designed to go in and fix damage and fight bacteria. And all of a sudden they just turn into these bigger and bigger plaques. So, and there's a whole massive disease process that goes along with it, but that's some parts. So it's not the cholesterol that's a problem. It's actually the glycation of the cholesterol, of certain cholesterols that you get when you're eating fructose and sugar and alcohol. So when you're in that state, blood sugar is at too high of a level is really bad for you. So this is what kills diabetics, just that simple fact that their blood sugar is up all the time. That's what breaks down their body. That's what gives them peripheral vascular disease, heart disease, neurological dysfunction, and so forth. Their body just breaks down from the inside out, and they have very hard lives if it's not well controlled. And that's it. And you control your blood sugar, it's like you don't have diabetes, because it's the blood sugar that's causing harm.
Yeah.
And
so am I right in saying these diabetics, they're in the fed state all the time, because they're constantly getting this blood sugar spike from the exogenous, which is exogenous carbohydrates, which is a good way to describe it, because most people would think that carbohydrates can only be exogenous, that are constantly spiking the blood sugar and then triggering the insulin response. So it's just kind of, am I on the right track there?
Yeah, well, yeah, and they, most of us that aren't on a carnivore diet or a ketogenic diet are in are in this fed state. And this is where like intermittent fasting comes in, because you're just waiting out the clock on the insulin, and then your body gets back into its normal state. People feel a lot better. They can work out more, have better exercise tolerance. They go run marathons on their fasting day where they don't need anything that day, and so on. So they, people already see the benefits of being in what I call our primary metabolic state. And so, when you have high blood sugar, and your insulin is going to be driven up defensively, because your body recognizes this is dangerous and is saying, okay, what the hell has this person done? Get that insulin up as quickly as possible. So your insulin slams up. Insulin blocks something called proteolysis and lipolysis, which are basically the ability for your body to break down proteins and fats in order to get energy. Okay, so in layman's terms, it forces energy into cells. It doesn't allow it to come out of cells. And so you're forcing all this energy because you have way too much, and your body's like, get this the hell out of here. And so you're just stuffing it in every cell in your body. It goes in the body and into muscle, into muscle and your brains, things like that, and different organs that you're using. But it also goes into places that you don't want. It stores it in glycogen, which is fine. You can use that later. And it stores it into fat, intramuscular fat, fat all around your body, but also intramuscular fat. And so this is where like marbling on the cow comes from. This is why they give them grain, is to get that intramuscular fat. And so, we're doing that to ourselves. So people who eat carbohydrates and sugar, they have marbled muscle. And some bodybuilders and things like that say, oh, you have to eat carbs because it gives you that pump. Well, no, not really. It gives you excess glycogen and retained water and intramuscular fat.
Yeah,
so that's not actually healthy.
It's really helpful if you're trying to just take up as much space as you can, right? Rather than necessarily be as strong or as toned or as healthy, or have that really tight look. If you're just purely trying to take up space, sure, go on.
Exactly. Some of these guys, they do a trip where they'll eat some carbohydrates and things like that right before their competition, and they'll just sort of swell up a bit, and if they want to do that, that's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
It's doing this bulking and cutting sort of thing. I think that's very counterproductive, because you're just filling your muscles up with glycogen and fat, and then that just has to go away eventually, and so you just lost it, and you're less healthy. So that's what it's doing in your fed state. And it's basically, you're just in damage control the whole time. Well, you can't, any system cannot be in damage control the whole time. It's going to start falling apart at the sides. So when you're in a fasting state, so-called fasting state, which I think is our main state, that doesn't happen. So insulin stays at a very low level, just enough to keep things working properly, but not so much that it shuts down your body's metabolic working. So now you can access your fat stores. Because when you're in the fed state, the carbohydrate state, you cannot access your fat stores.
Very important point that everyone should understand.
Yeah. So everything you eat goes into your fat, but now you cannot access your fat stores. So this is like filling up your car at the petrol station, gas station, and then just putting a cork in it so it can't go to your engine. It's like, oh no, this is just for when I get lost in the desert or something. Like, that doesn't make any damn sense. Your fat in your body is your gas tank. You eat food that fills up your gas tank. Now you run on your gas, petrol, for whoever's listening. And that's the state that you're in the so-called fasting state. And so now your body can use its energy. It can mobilize blood sugar, glycogen, ketones, all these sorts of things. Your brain's major energy source are ketones. That's what people think is glucose. It's not. You do not run on glucose really when you're in the fasting state. You always run on ketones. Your brain always runs on ketones. And so this is actually something that's been theorized. There's a guy, Dr. Bickman from BYU, who has an Instagram page, really interesting stuff. He was talking about how Alzheimer's and so forth can actually be, it's actually thought of as, some people are calling it type 3 diabetes, which is what I've mentioned in other talks. So more of a metabolic issue. That is similar to type 2 diabetes and so forth. And you can see this because they have peripheral insulin resistance in your brain as well. So you have insulin resistance. Now, your body can't get, blood sugar into these cells very well, can't utilize them very well. Your brain is also part of that. So now your brain's not really running on full steam. And so you start slowing down, and actually you can have people with these tangles and these plaques that are indicative of Alzheimer's. But if they don't have the peripheral insulin resistance and so forth, they don't actually get the disease. And so what's more important is your body's inability to get energy into your brain cells. And so when you go into a ketogenic diet, and there have been many studies showing that a high fat ketogenic diet actually is a better treatment modality for Alzheimer's than every other medication that's ever been trialed for Alzheimer's. Okay. And Dr. Bickman was, saying that this is because when you go into a ketogenic state, now you switch over to ketones. Now your brain is getting a lot of ketones because your brain wants to run on ketones. It can run on glucose. It wants to run on ketones.
Yeah. I might just jump in there that anyone who's ever experienced ketosis, and particularly maybe for the first time, it was a pretty extreme experience for me. And I feel like, you tap into, it's like that movie Limitless with Bradley Cooper, and you've just got like this epic energy, and you're running nice and smooth, and you can concentrate and just keep on chugging. So yeah, I totally agree with you. If people want to be successful, we should be in a state of ketosis more, which is similar to this, what we're calling a fasted state, which it sounds like, doctors talk about it as if like, you could occasionally enter a fasted state, before a surgery or something, or, maybe do intermittent fasting. But the reality is that you could be in this fasted state all the time.
Well, you're supposed to be, I think.
You're supposed to be, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you look at all animals in the wild, like, almost all of them, they're all in this ketogenic starvation state. Like, okay, so and people that don't really understand this, that just look at biochemistry and say, oh, fed state, fasting state, and just there's always the things like, you can think outside the box. The box is heretofore prescribed knowledge, right? So we're saying this is, in this box is fed state, fasting state. Okay, you think outside the box and say, well, actually it works better if you flip those two around, and say that the fasting state is actually a primary state, and the fed state is actually a pathological defense mechanism, your body trying to protect you from hyperglycemia. There's one more point about the the so-called fed state. You're throwing energy into cells, you can't allow it to come out of cells, you can't access your fat cells, but it does something more insidious, which is it blocks a hormone called leptin, which I've spoken about before. Leptin is released from your stretch receptors in your stomach. So when you eat a big meal, it stretches out, it releases leptin, your body goes, oh, I'm full. But the majority of it comes from your fat cells. And so this actually tells your brain how much fat that you have, how much energy you have in the tank. And so when you're eating these sorts of things, insulin goes up, insulin blocks leptin. And now your brain can't see its leptin. It doesn't know how much energy it has. And so it thinks that you're hungry. And now your blood sugar is dropping because your insulin stays up for about 24 hours. And again, you can't mobilize energy when your insulin is up. So now your blood sugar is dropping. Your brain can't see its leptin. So you get a signal that you have zero energy reserves and your blood sugar is dropping. And your brain sends out a panic signal that says, if you don't eat now, you will die. And this is why 3 times a day, people go, oh my God, I'm starving. And they're panicked. You see these, funny videos on the internet and things like that of someone just freaking out, screaming like, I want, Taco Bell, whatever it is. And they're just losing their mind. I haven't eaten in 12 hours. They're losing their mind. And it's funny because like, they're obviously not starving to death, but they're so panicked and they're so emotional because their brain really is sending them a signal that they will die without food. And that's very distressing. And this is what causes people to overeat because they don't have a natural stop mechanism. Whereas in carnivore ketogenic, you naturally stop because meat stops tasting good when your body doesn't want it. Your body recognizes, my brain can see its leptin and so forth, and things, it tastes better. Meat tastes better when it wants that energy. And then at a certain point, it's the best thing. That's why when I started eating a steak, it's the best damn thing I've ever eaten in my life, every single day. It never gets tiresome. People say, oh, don't you get bored of that? Never. Because by definition, when I'm hungry, that's going to taste good. And so it tastes amazing at first, amazing, really good. It's okay. It's all right. And I get to a point where I just go like, yeah, I'm really not enjoying this anymore. And I naturally want to stop. So it's natural portion control that you have if your brain can see your leptin, that you don't have that when you're eating carbohydrates and so forth. So people talk about, fasting and how beneficial this is. And there are plenty of studies that show that. And for all sorts of different reasons. And then they say, oh, well, a ketogenic diet and a carnivore diet, well, this just mimics fasting. And so you get the benefit, you mimic some of the benefits of fasting. That's all it is. It's just fasting. Fasting's really good for you, and you're just mimicking fasting. Or fasting gets rid of this poison that's really bad for you and mimics your evolved metabolic state that you're supposed to be in at all times anyway. And because we call this a fasting state, because we think of this as a stress state, which it's not, if you're starving, you're in a stress state. But if you're just in that metabolism, that's not a stress state, because you're not stressed. Your body's eating, you're getting nutrients and so forth. Because they just don't think about it, and they're still thinking within the box, and they probably haven't even learned about the box, because most people who talk about this sort of stuff have never taken biochemistry, so they don't know what they're talking about. They think, oh, this must be a starvation state. This is a stress state. And so, this can't be good long-term. You can't do that. And so, and I've heard, one guy say, this is your body, you're just tricking your body into thinking it's starving to death, and then getting the benefits of, well, starving to death. And I was like, you tell me one benefit of starving to death, except you're now dead and I don't have to listen to this nonsense anymore.
Yeah, that was all mumbo jumbo, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it is. And so it's just like, you get this thing, you're getting benefits of, of being in a starvation state. Well, no, fasting puts you into the metabolism you're supposed to be in. So this is the metabolism we're supposed to be in. We have other studies too. There was actually, to do with diabetics, there was a study with animal models basically showing that, again, fasting was very beneficial, and that for fasting for a number of days, the longer the better, within reason. But if you were able to fast these animals for at least 4 days a month, you could actually significantly reverse and pull back on type 2 diabetes as well as type 1 diabetes. So you get better control, obviously. The type 2 diabetics are going to get the same results you would from a ketogenic or a carnivore metabolism, or even just fasting, because this helps reverse peripheral insulin resistance, normalize your blood sugars, and just essentially it's giving your body a break from the poison that's causing the problem. And that's really what's doing it. And your body's just getting back to normal. But very interestingly, they found that some of the animals could actually regrow their beta islet cells in their pancreas and actually start producing insulin again, which is not something that we thought was going to be possible. Now, this was only in animal models, but I think they're trialing this in human models. But because they said that, well, fasting gives these benefits, but fasting for 4 days in a row, that's really hard for people to do. That's not really nice. And so they came up with this fasting mimicking diet. So this is a diet that mimics fasting, basically a ketogenic diet, carnivore diet. And so this tricks your body into thinking it's fasting, and then you get these benefits from fasting. But if you're eating something that provides all these massive, massive benefits, maybe you should stop and think and say, maybe that's what we're supposed to be eating all the time. Maybe that's what we evolved on. Maybe biologically, that's what we should be eating. And maybe biologically, these other things are causing harm, because you remove those from your diet, you don't get the harm anymore. I don't know how to make it more simple than that. That's really straightforward. And so they do this fasting mimicking diet, and they find they get the same results. So again, this is further evidence that this is really just how we're supposed to be eating. This is the biochemical state that we should be in all the time. And that the closer you get to our biological heritage, which is a carnivore heritage, the better you're going to be, the healthier you're going to be. Carbohydrates and sugar, absolutely some of the worst in the world. But, you can be on ketogenics and still eat a bunch of plants that have, toxic elements because they don't want you to eat them. And so they're trying to deter you. And so they're trying to make you unwell. And so obviously getting closer and closer and closer to carnivore, the better you're going to be. But simply for discussions of diabetes, just getting into doing a ketogenic diet will significantly help you.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. There's a lot there. I'm going to try and somewhat sort of simplify it. Hopefully I'm on the right track. But a regular diet where you're eating a lot of carbohydrates spikes your glucose level. You get an insulin response. If people do this too much, that causes or brings on type 2 diabetes. And it's been proven in studies that fasting or a fasted state can reduce the symptoms and actually reverse type 2 diabetes. The hidden truth is that a carnivore diet or some form of ketogenic diet is actually also now considered a fasted state, which it's clearly not because you're eating. But because it's not spiking your glucose and then you don't get the insulin response, it's called a fasted state. So really you can get the benefits of fasting, or the so-called benefits, which have been shown in these animals who had to fast for 4 days, which is hard yakka. I've never done that. I don't think most people would enjoy doing that. You can get those same benefits by just simply not eating carbohydrates and not eating plants that have toxic chemicals in them. And therefore, you're going to function better and you can actually reverse type 2 diabetes. Is that more or less?
Yeah. And I would sort of say as well, going keto or carnivore, saying that gets the benefits of fasting. I would say the other way around, that fasting gives you the benefits of being on a ketogenic or carnivore diet, really, from a metabolic state, being in the right metabolic frame.
I mean, if you want to endure a 4-day fast, by all means, go for it.
And that's fine. Some people do. I mean, I don't recommend fasting if you're on a carnivore diet. You don't need to. You just listen to your body. Your body will naturally limit calories for what you're doing. When I was back on this, last sort of 4 or 5 years, I at first had excess fat. So I wasn't massive, but I definitely had weight I could lose. And so I ate much less because even though I was working out like crazy, I was back, playing rugby and lifting weights very heavily because I could again. I just felt amazing. I was eating a lot less than I am now, even just to maintain. And that's because my body wanted to use my fat first. So it knew that it was there. It saw the leptin, said, no, we don't need all that much. And so I was eating much less. And I felt weird about it, at first, because I felt, I was like, well, I just worked out, I just did a 3-hour gym session, I did a 3-hour rugby session. I'm going to be doing the same thing tomorrow. So I really need to eat. I hadn't eaten that whole day, but everything in me was saying steak just doesn't sound good right now. And what I tell people, if the steak doesn't taste good, that means you're not hungry. And I learned this myself firsthand. And I was like, well, I should eat because, that's what you think. I need to eat today so I can use that energy tomorrow. You need, carbs to burn carbs. Wrong. You have a gas tank. My gas tank was full. I didn't need to fill it up anymore. So everything just sounded like, oh, I don't want to eat. But I was like, oh, I should really eat something. So I took a long time to cook it, did like a reverse sear in the oven, took a couple hours, just took my time with it. And eventually I was just like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess I could kind of, eat something. So I started eating. I got, I don't know, a quarter of the way into this steak, amazing ribeye steak, which is beautiful. And I just thought to myself, I was like, I really am just not enjoying this. I just want to stop. And so I did. Put it away, did my whole workout the next day, felt fine, then came back and I had my steak there. It's dry, it's cold, it's hard, and it tasted absolutely amazing. It was unbelievable how good that thing was, and that's the power of taste. And that's why you should listen to that. And so my body was telling me, this is how many calories you need, this is how much nutrition you need, stop. And so it's perfect. And so when you're eating like that, your body just works so much better, and you can fast and you achieve the same metabolic state, but you don't have to, and it's not important to if you're eating a carnivore diet. because your body will just naturally limit the caloric intake anyway.
How hungry you are. Yeah, there's something deceptive when it comes to satiety with carbohydrates, and you don't realize that until you start experimenting with a carnivore or a ketogenic diet, and you start to discover that, hey, if you actually eat too many eggs, that last egg, your body's just going to say, I ain't eating this. This isn't pleasant. Or and it's the same with steak, like you said, or like when I have, homemade like beef mince or anything like that, like you just know straight away, like, I ain't enjoying this anymore. I'm putting it back in the fridge. I've had enough. Whereas you compare that to like a bowl of cereal, or you compare that to eating cake or Nutella or all this sort of stuff, you really can keep going. And because the flavors can be so different as well, and your body just says, yeah, I'll have more ice cream, or I'll have more whatever it is that's really sweet. It's interesting.
Yeah, I see that with my patients as well, who are trying to lose weight, and they've obviously had portion control issues, and I think that I don't think that that's quite fair. They don't have portion control issues. I don't think they just didn't know how to manage their own portions. It's that they're eating carbohydrates and sugar, and that's deranging their hunger signals and so forth. So they don't realize how much they need, and when they've gone past that. So it's really not their fault. There's other people just like, they're just hungry all the time and miserable and just hate their life, and other people choose not to live like that. And but when I get them on a carnivore diet, I always explain to them their hunger signals are going to be very different, and that they should use taste as their measure. And if a steak doesn't taste good, they're not hungry. But if it does taste good, they are. And so they should listen to that and eat meat when it tastes good until it stops tasting as good. And you naturally just want to stop. I try to explain that to people because I've run into this issue, but there's always a few that sort of don't take that to heart. And I see them in a couple of weeks, and some of them I'll ask them, how's it going? And they're like, I hate it. I hate this. I hate eating meat. It's just horrible. I'm just not enjoying this. I just hate it. And you can tell they've come into the office looking for a fight, and they're just like, ugh, and like, I want to get off this. So I just ask them, it's like, okay, well, does it always taste bad? Like, even at first, when you first start the meal, does it taste bad then? And they go, well, no, at first it tastes really good, but I get halfway through and it just tastes horrible. And I have to force feed myself for 2 hours to finish the meal. And, then I have to, of course, explain to them, well, that was your body telling you that's all you need. Because when you tell people you can eat as much as you want, the operative word there is want. When it stops tasting good and you're force feeding yourself, you clearly don't want to eat anymore. And so they make this big old thing. That's a portion size that they're used to eating, and say, oh, that's what I'll eat today. You get halfway through and you start hating it. Well, that's as much as you wanted, or at least that's as much as your body wanted. And so it's very important to look at it that way. But we get the opposite problem with people that are quite skinny and underweight, because they've had the other problem. They've been basically starving themselves. People with eating disorders, bulimia, anorexia, and so forth. They don't eat enough, and their hunger signals are very different. So they never feel hungry anymore. So they go, oh, I just don't need to eat. And so they end up not eating enough and getting problems from that. I had that problem when I first started, because I just didn't realize that that my hunger signals would change so much, because I was doing this 20 plus years ago, and all I was doing was just not eating plants, because I knew plants had harmful chemicals and I didn't want them in my body. And I was inadvertently doing a pure carnivore diet, and I wasn't eating for days at a time while going to university full time and training in high level rugby 7 hours a day, 8 hours a day. And I wouldn't eat for 3-4 days in a row.
Why was that? Because
I just didn't realize it. I was very time poor. And so I would get up in the morning and I would go straight to classes at University of Washington. And then straight from class, I'd go to my University of Washington rugby practice. That started at 3:30. And then as soon as I finished that, I went to my senior training with Seattle Saracens. and would train until, 9 o'clock at night. And sometimes I'd go to the gym after that. And so, that was a lot of training, and I didn't really have much time. And then I had to go home and I had to, study and read and things like that, or, go to the gym. And so maybe I'm getting home at like 11, sometimes 12, and I had to be up early in the morning to go to class again. And so often I would just be like, well, I don't have time to eat. I wouldn't feel hungry. So I just drink a bunch of water and then pass out. Every now and then I would, come home a bit earlier. I would have managed my time a little better or finished the workout earlier. And I would sit there and be like, oh, I have like 45 minutes before I need to go to bed. I have time to cook. And I was like, yeah, and I should eat something because I didn't eat yesterday. And I was like, yeah, and I don't think I ate the day before that. And I was like, did I eat the day before that? And I was like, okay, well, I really need to eat something then, because like I've not been eating enough. And I noticed this as I was going along. I was like, I'm really not eating enough. I'm really barely eating any calories, but I just never felt hungry. And so it was just, I was listening to that, and people on the other side listen to it and eat too much, but I had the other problem. And so I ended up getting undernourished, and I got to the point where I started actually feeling worse the more I worked out, because my body had just run out of its stores, and it was just like, now it's causing harm by working out. I sort of started eating more after that, but it was a while there that I just wasn't eating enough. And so then I have patients and friends and just people I talk to that get on this, and if they're quite underweight, they tend to eat very little. And so I try to tell them, if you're feeling a bit off, you're feeling a bit tired, or something's just not right, think to yourself, does this mean I'm hungry? Am I hungry? Try eating meat or eggs. If that tastes good, that means you're hungry, and you need to eat until it stops tasting good. And then you can relearn your hunger signals. Now I know when I'm hungry or when I'm not. It's very easy for me to tell, but I couldn't then, and most people can't either.
Yeah, that's interesting. The hunger receptors, because it is it's a different feeling. It's not my blood sugar's crashing. Oh my God, I'm hangry. I need a Snickers. It's it's I'm running low on energy. Something doesn't feel quite right here. I don't feel like doing any training. Just something's off. Totally different.
Yeah. That's just gonna mention one thing too. When you're talking about training, you're talking about metabolism and all these sorts of things. Insulin plays a big role in this. It's an anabolic substance, so it causes you to store energy into cells, make those cells grow. And so sometimes people take this stuff in order to force that reaction, which I think is very counterproductive. But we see this in type 1 diabetics, where they stop making insulin, so their insulin levels are zero. Their metabolism is like 20% higher, 25% higher, so it runs faster. So they lose a lot of weight. That's one of the first signs of someone who has type 1 diabetes, is that they're peeing a lot. That's what diabetes means. It means you pee a lot. Diabetes mellitus, that's what this is. It means it tastes sweet. So because you're peeing out a lot of blood sugar because your body can't use it. Either because you're resistant to insulin or because you don't produce insulin. And I swear to God, doctors actually would taste pee in order to figure out if it was diabetes mellitus or insipidus. And that's
a job.
Yeah, that's not a job for me anyway. And so they lose a lot of weight. One reason obviously being is because they can't utilize their blood sugar. But also is because they jacked up their metabolism, their metabolic rate. And when you get people on insulin, that their metabolism actually normalizes, and it goes back to what it's supposed to be. Now, think of the converse of this. Now you have type 2 diabetic who is chronically hyperglycemic and hyperinsulinemic, so their insulin levels really high all the time. That's going to really suppress their metabolism and their body's ability to utilize energy, because it's saying store energy, store energy, okay. Store energy, store energy. And so, this is why you can get the sort of the two-pronged attack. You're getting peripheral insulin resistance that goes along with weight gain. It doesn't have to be. There are a significant proportion of people that are metabolically unwell. These sort of the skinny fat people that still have metabolic syndrome, but are normal weight.
Mm-hmm.
But if this does go hand in hand, it slows down your metabolism. You're not able to utilize energy as well. You're not able to work out as hard. You're not able to lose weight as well because of this high insulin state. So that's something to consider too. This is another added benefit of getting onto a carnivore diet and so forth, is that you're going to normalize your insulin, which is going to normalize and in most people speed up your metabolism. This is also important for heart disease as well. This is something that I was in a debate just a few days ago with ACNIM, the Australian College of Nutritional and Environmental Medicine. We had a panel of very famous cardiologists and then me for some reason. And very, very honored to be amongst all these people, because they're very, very, very well established and internationally renowned people. And one of the major themes that was brought up there was that the people that we argued that cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease and we need to rethink what we're doing here, we won that debate quite handily. And one of the things that my colleagues were saying was this really is more to do with high insulin states, and this, being in a hyperinsulinemic state, that this is actually a driver of heart disease state and so forth. And that has to do with a lot of things. But you think about it, your insulin's up. That's because your blood sugar's up, and your blood sugar is causing glycation to all these cholesterol molecules and so forth, and it helps drive this disease process. So there are a lot of benefits to going on a carnivore diet, metabolically reversing diseases, preventing heart disease and so forth, weight loss and just feeling good all the time. It makes such an impact in your life. Just that simple difference of eating carbohydrates and not eating carbohydrates changes everything. And so this is why, I tell people that the last 5% of going pure has about 95% of the benefits, because if you're eating a little bit of carbs, that's going to be enough to jack your insulin up and stuff up your metabolism for an entire day. And so if you're eating low carb, a lot of people that eat low carb, depending on how low it is, if it's not low enough, they end up feeling rotten because they can't produce energy and they're not eating enough carbohydrates to make them feel good at all. So it's definitely something that I advise people against doing if you're just going to go, completely without carbs, if they're going to make the jump.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. It's something that we should dive into on a whole other topic, which is kind of like that metabolic flexibility. I totally agree in terms of the experimentation and feeling and experiencing what you feel like running on zero carbohydrates, because if it works for you, I mean, it is fantastic. You feel great with energy and you just want to get more done. All right, Dr. Chaffee, to sort of wrap things up, as I said at the start, in America, 1 in 10 people have diabetes. In Australia, 1 in 20, so slightly lower. But chances are you will know someone who is suffering from diabetes, or you might be suffering from diabetes yourself. Do you have a little bit of advice for them?
Yeah, I think that it's vitally important to at least go on a ketogenic diet, especially if you're someone who suffers from diabetes or is pre-diabetic or has family members that are diabetic, because type 2 diabetes, may be more, there may be a genetic component to that, and people are more susceptible to that. So if it runs in your family, that could be an issue. But it's going to be better for everyone if you get away from carbohydrates and sugar. We were talking about, in America, around 10%, I think it's like 9% of people in America are diabetic. Those people account for 75% of the Medicare costs in America. Okay, so it's a huge burden of disease. It's extremely expensive. It has all these problems that are precipitated from them.
Lots of opportunity for pharmaceutical companies there.
Sorry?
Lots of opportunity for pharmaceutical companies.
Well, yeah, exactly. And this is why everyone's looking for pharmaceuticals to help, mitigate this disease, as opposed to figuring out how the hell to get rid of it, which is what I'm trying to do. And, so when you consider that's already taking up that huge burden of cost on the healthcare system of every country. And just in America, 9% account for 75% of the Medicare costs, right? Now we realize that 40% of Americans, of the rest of the population, are pre-diabetic. Okay, so ostensibly, if they don't change what they're doing, and if things remain as they are, they won't. In a decade or so, you could have nearly half the population of America being a diabetic, and now having to incur all these costs. A lot of these costs come from people being diabetic for a long time, and they break down slowly. So it's not going to be like you go diabetic, bam, you have this really expensive thing to treat. But eventually, this is accounting for 75% of the budget, and now you've quintupled your disease burden. What's that going to do? I mean, that is a major factor in healthcare crises, because one of the major crises in healthcare is funding this. So whatever system you think is going to be best, I certainly have my own opinions. Whatever it is, if you keep increasing the disease burden, a very, very costly disease, it's just going to run out of control. And if you can just reverse that by having people not do something. I mean, what's cheaper than not eating something extra? You're actually saving money. And so you not do that, and now all of a sudden this disease goes away. And that significantly reduces the disease burden in the country, and it makes these people's lives so much better. I don't care who you are, living with diabetes is not fun. And maybe people like cake more than they like living without diabetes. That's, I'm sure there's going to be a few of those, but
that's their choice.
If they didn't have to, a lot of people don't want to. A lot of people don't want to live with diabetes. And if they had the option, like my mom did, who's a big foodie, she loves cooking, loves all these things. It was very hard for her at first, but she had such a great outcome with her blood sugar control and coming off medications that she said, okay, well, this is just what I have to do now. There's just no two ways about it. And so having that as an option for people, I think, is just very important, and to at least think about and consider and understand, this is the disease process, this is the toxicity process, this is why it's happening, and this is what you can expect if you keep going down that path.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, what do you have to lose if you're suffering, or you're looking to avoid suffering from type 2 diabetes? The ketogenic diet's been proven to help. The carnivore diet's going to be even more effective.
Yeah,
the science is there. Give it a crack.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we've been treating diabetes type 1 and type 2 since the 1800s with a ketogenic diet.
This stuff isn't new. That's the other thing. This isn't a breakthrough.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we're just sort of rediscovering what everyone knew for a very long time.
Yeah. Oh man. All right. Well, that was a great chat. All about diabetes. Thanks, Dr. Chaffee. You were on today.
No problem.
Appreciate it. Till next time.
Absolutely.